Good afternoon. So we have the graveyard shift after lunch. Hopefully, these two titans of industry are going to enliven it enough to wake us all up post-lunch. We have decided that we are going to focus on how business is responding to the challenge of Viksit Bharat. And we'll address a few things, but let's start with the employment challenge. We've had labor market reforms passed by Parliament and signed off by the President, but they haven't been notified either by the center or the states. Now, there's some debate about whether the center has notified the labor market reforms. They're supposed to have substantially reduce the complexity of the labor laws from about 44 codes to 4. But the challenge, of course, is that most states haven't notified them. How is industry responding to the challenge of employment, and why is it that industry does not employ more people, and particularly in labor-intensive manufacturing? But in broad terms, what is clear is that we keep going for capital-intensive rather than labor-intensive investment. Why is that? Yeah.
Good afternoon, and thank you. It's wonderful to be on the show, and let me start out by congratulating the Republic team on this wonderful new setup that they have. But with regard to the question, may I take the liberty, first of all, of rephrasing it slightly? I would like to look upon it as the Viksit Bharat opportunity, not the challenge. Now let's, that being said, let's look at the various components. And you have certainly highlighted something which is, when it comes to employment, that is obviously for a country as large as ours, that is something that we need to focus on very carefully. And at one level, what is unfortunate is that all the effort to codify the vast number of rules and regulations pertaining to labor laws to distill it down to 4 codes, I think has been a brilliant effort. What is unfortunate is that this debate invariably, looks at labor law reforms as a hire and fire policy, which is not what it is. There are many more aspects to it than that. And if at all, hire and fire is a matter of to be discussed. So from that point of view, a lot of the heavy lifting has been done, like you said, in terms of codifying it down to 4 different codes. And obviously, what is now necessary is to take it forward. At a roundtable discussion that we had at FICCI some time ago, where Dr. Panagaria was there, 2 important points came about, one of which is what you referred to, that in a country as large as ours, if you are not effectively utilizing that factor of reform, which is labor, then obviously it is suboptimal going ahead. That doesn't mean there's anything against the use of capital or technology, but labor is something that has to be utilized more effectively. And in that regard, I think what is necessary and what will perhaps break this logjam and take it forward is to have 1 or 2 of the more advanced states in terms of a manufacturing ecosystem taking the plunge and setting a standard for the others to follow. I think that is what is necessary to take it forward. From an industry perspective, certainly I think what one needs to look at is to use and to leverage labor, given that it is a significant factor of production that is available in abundance. And in that context, again, from a FICCI perspective, what we have talked about, and I think industry in general talks about, is leveraging, for example, the productivity-linked incentive schemes and bringing in an element of employment, or if nothing else, at least targeting those sectors which have very high employment potential. I think that is what will make a difference.
Mr. Banerjee.
So having talked about the reform side of it and what we require, I think we need to, first of all, appreciate that given the demography of the country, we need to utilize this window of opportunity when we have this availability, the supply side of labor effectively. And having said that, therefore, one thing which, as you said, what industry is doing and should be doing is looking at that from an angle of how one can really look at upskilling and really making them relevant for the type of jobs which are available or going to be available as we go forward. So future of jobs, future of skills, and related to that. That's the first piece I would think which is very critical, and that's what's been given a lot of emphasis both by the industry, and I would also see the government really giving major focus on upskilling and reskilling. The second part of it, which we must appreciate, that the larger companies, the jobs are going to really come from the small and the micro companies. The larger companies are going to be by and large going for automation, rightly so, no issues, but yes, jobs will come, a large amount of jobs will come from the small, mid-sized companies and even micro-sized companies. So the importance of it, and therein also lies a lot of role for the large companies and many institutions to play, is to look at how one makes our small and mid-sized companies more effective to the supply chain, which would mean that they would be able to grow, they would be able to be a part of the supply chain of the larger companies as they take global advantage, Indian advantage of the market, and therefore they are able to employ more. I think that's the second piece which industry is focused on and is looking at it, besides the various, of course, areas of governmental reforms, etc., which will come as it does. And my last point, and the third one, which I would like to emphasize on, is as we move on, there are areas which are very labor intensive, like we talk about textiles, so to say, which could be a very highly labor intensive. So if you look at even services sector, tourism, if you look at, is a huge labor intensive sort of sector. So in these labor intensive sectors, if we can have I would think that if there is a situation where we can really look at tourism as a priority sector in the country, where we can, from skilling right up to small chains, to homestays, to all of it, if we are able to create a change to a 7-star hotel, I think we will be able to create an ecosystem of employment. I think there's a role of industry there to play too, even when we look at industries like textiles and all. So how do we focus on some priority labor-intensive sectors? And I think those are three issues which I would lay onto the table for moving forward.
Wonderful. So that takes me on to a related topic, which is China. I mean, if you look at even textiles, China's textile and garment exports are 9 times India's. Despite the fact that if you look at history from the time of Chandragupta Maurya, when we had visitors coming to India from Greece and Rome, they used to marvel at the cloth and clothes that India produced. So we used to be the producers of cloth and clothes for the world for 3,000 years until the last 77. We stopped being the primary producer. But then if you look more broadly, steel, aluminium, cement, in almost every sector, China now accounts for about half of world production. India is second in all three. Now the point is, India is therefore an industrialized country. We are the second biggest producer of steel. Nobody apart from China, has ever produced as much steel as we produced last year, in any given year. So we are a steel producer. But the problem is that China has so much overcapacity that it then dumps its capacity on the rest of the world, and we are a prime source of dumping. So should our response to China be to continue to impose anti-dumping duties, to stop some of these dumping actions? Or should we take advantage of cheap Chinese imports to value add? So you're in ferroalloys, so it goes straight to you with that question with regard to steel, with iron and steel.
So, the statistics first, and you're absolutely right that when it comes to most commodities, China accounts for roughly half the world's production, and then it is distributed amongst the rest, whether it is steel, whether it is other points. Now, what should be the reaction to Chinese overcapacity? I believe a set of internal actions and a set of external actions. Internal, clearly do more of what the government has done, which is a focus on ease of doing business, a focus on reducing cost of doing business, so that we work at enhancing the competitiveness of Indian industry. The fact is that if you look at where India stands today, we are at the confluence of a huge opportunity where we can cater to a large domestic market as well as be a production base for the world. But that requires you to be competitive, that requires you to be part of global value chains, etc. From an external perspective, if you look at the likelihood of dumping, I can say this very confidently that Indian industry today, all that we want is a level playing field. If you have a level playing field, then that is all that you need. So from that point of view, if there is evidence of dumping happening, and I'm certainly aware in certain sectors it has happened, then one shouldn't look at whether it is anti-dumping duties or anything of that sort as protectionism, but providing a level playing field. And if that is given to us, along with all the efforts which have been made, as I said, from a sustained reforms point of view, I think Indian industry is more than capable of holding its head high. The second point I wanted to make with regard to where China stands in terms of capacities across various sectors and where India stands, again, I see that as an opportunity, because what the last several years have proven, especially with COVID, is that you have to have a resilient supply chain and a diversified supply chain. And somehow people had been lulled over the last 20-odd years into forgetting that basic tenet of a diversified supply chain. And therein lies the opportunity for India. So we're not, it's not a question of competing with someone or a China plus one, but to say that, look, there is huge opportunity, as again evidenced by the fact that, India's share of global trade today has a lot of headroom, which I see as a tremendous opportunity.
Yes. So if you could take it to other sectors apart from steel, cars, chemicals.
Yeah. So, one point is on steel. You said that India has been the second largest, but we imported. And, what happens in manufacturing, and Subhrakanta also mentioned, when you see a cheaper source of supply, you get tempted to take from there, for your inputs. But having said that, I see China is not just a threat in terms of its dumping to India, but it applies to other parts of the world. But moving on, I think, other sectors, as you mentioned, we have to build in a resilient supply chain on every sector, be it pharmaceutical, be it rare earths, be it whatever. And I think besides being able to produce in India, there are sources which we would really need to look at, because it's a trade deficit of 100 billion is not a sustainable trading partnership. And I think one has to also look at it from that perspective, from the Indian industry point of view, as well as from the economic point of view. The second part is, India has to compete in areas of quality in terms of value add. So while there could be mass manufacturing, and we are competing there, not a private sector versus private sector, but a private sector versus a state over there. So here we will have to see how we match through areas of design, through areas of quality, with areas of value add, to see how our products are able to have that edge on Chinese products across the sectors. And third and last, as we build these, which I started with, the supply chain, diversification, I think we would have to see a long-term game plan of us being able to develop capacity enough in India in areas where we have dependence on any geography for that matter. But lastly, to end with, I would imagine we should keep national security topmost in our mind as we look at how both from the point of view of both trade as well as investment. So I think that given that concern, given that pivot, we should then go into the other three areas that I just spoke about.
Terrific. I'll come back to RCEP, which is again a live issue related to this. But before we do that, a contemporary issue relevant to this particular week especially is that America has just re-elected Trump with a decisive mandate. There's generally been a euphoric response in India because he is seen as a friend of India, and particularly he is seen as an enemy of China, which I think if you just look at the tariffs he imposed on China, they definitely had an impact. China's share of U.S. imports has gone down from 22% to 13% since he imposed those tariffs. So they've worked. He intends to do much more of that. But he also intends to perhaps impose tariffs on others. So do you look at the election of Trump as an opportunity or a threat from the industry standpoint and from a broader strategic standpoint for India?
I think it's certainly above my pay grade to start talking about America's political choices. I mean, we have to deal with whatever it is that elections, whether in the US or anywhere else, throws up. But generally speaking, the view public opinion has been that the Republican Party is more friendly towards trade. Having said that, the counterbalance to that is the threat of tariffs, etc. But what we have to keep in mind is that every nation will do what it considers in its best interests. But yes, the strategic alignment that India and the US have developed over the last decade or so means that these two democracies will have to work together. I mean, working together doesn't mean that you agree on everything, that there aren't areas of disagreement. But if you, by and large, agree on more than you disagree on, I think that's what defines a strategic partnership. Now, from an Indian industry point of view, I think what we're looking at is the opportunities that we get by the two countries coming closer together, whether it is in terms of technology transfer, whether it is in terms of access to the latest technology, whether it is the latest innovations, and even while we have to step up our game in the research and development field in terms of stepping up our expenditure, in terms of focusing more on innovation, as CB said, focusing on quality, etc., because that's what it takes to be competitive and acceptable globally. I think working together with U.S. U.S. counterparts on areas of common interest where we can collaborate to move forward together is a great opportunity for Indian industry.
So, exactly taking it on from there, we have seen phenomenal achievements of India globally in terms of building partnership, building relationships at the leadership level. And US is no exception. In fact, we had seen it during the earlier administration of the president-elect. And moving on, if you really look at the relationship between US and India decadally over periods of time, it's changed dimensionally completely. Today, we are a strategic partnership of a kind where we are working on defense, which has moved on, which was never thought some time back. We have moved on to areas of energy. So there are collaborations and participation in areas which were not even talked about. And I'm sure that these are going to be strengthened moving forwards in the months and years to come. Look at the collaboration that we have established on ISET, the high-tech forum, which again shows how we are really looking at opportunities in areas which are completely new. And then we move on to areas like rare earths, where we will see phenomenal partnership. So I see strategic partnership and commercially, economically, and then moving on to the geoeconomic, geostrategic side, I see the US has a trusted partner in India. And I think that's something which India has played a very important role across the globe. So there's a lot of, I see, bilateral sort of gain, mutual gain in enhancing this relationship, which we have seen between the leaderships of the two countries.
So on that theme, President-elect, when he was President, Trump, emphasized the Quad, and he grew the Quad substantially. He emphasized the term Indo-Pacific as opposed to Asia-Pacific. It's quite interesting that the APEC summit is about to happen. APEC is something that we have been kept out of, but now the focus is shifting to the Indo-Pacific and IPEF. So looking forward, is the Quad and the IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, going to become more important to us? And should it become more important to Indian industry? Or should we go back to considering the RCEP? Now, my personal problem with RCEP is simple. We already have a free trade agreement with ASEAN. We have one with Korea, we have one with Japan, and with Australia. So the only ones missing are the US and New Zealand. Are China and New Zealand. China has 5,300 non-tariff barriers, which it is not willing to remove. So if we join RCEP, shouldn't we first focus on China's non-tariff barriers? Its tariffs are meaningless.
So, I think we will see a re-emergence of focus and priority on both the IPEF and APEC. I think Indo-Pacific and Quad, sorry. I think we will see a much more economic agenda and geoeconomics and geopolitics playing a positive role through these forums. That's going to be critical for us, and I think we'll take advantage of it and we'll push it. Now, RCEP is something which we'll need to be careful about in terms of the rules of origin. And we talked about our northern neighbor, but I think the rules of origin is something which is critical. Though you talked about the free trade agreements or trade agreements that were established with Japan and Korea in the past, they were established in the past. I see huge scope of renegotiating them in terms of India today, because at that point in time when it was done, and the time that we are living now are different, and therefore probably there is huge scope of us looking at. And if you see us going, India going in a way, I see India take, yes, you mentioned about Australia, but we are also looking at other economies. Who thought that we would be able to do this huge deal with the UAE, which is a set example of us being put into a fast track with UK, so to say today. And I would really imagine that discussions which started in the earlier administration of a free trade agreement with the US, I think they would look forward to it, because again, coming back on trade and trade deals, India would have to, there are economies where we would need to have complementarities much more than than RCEP, where we have no sanctity on the rules of origin. So we should move with our interests in mind as we move into trade agreements in the future.
So specifically as far as the relationship with the US is concerned, I think there will be multiple dimensions to it. Starting with the bilateral, as CB again mentioned about a potential trade deal, to the Quad and other groupings. So I think it's not a question of one or the other, it's a question of all of them working in tandem, and India looking to do what it can to protect its interests and project its power. But specifically, if we were to talk about RCEP or any other free trade agreements, I am all for trade agreements provided they have a level playing field, as I said. And the level playing field is not just in tariffs, but exactly as you pointed out, in terms of the non-tariff barriers, which negate any access that could come otherwise, in terms of rules of origin. And let's not forget that, when we talk about manufacturing competitiveness in India, one of the issues which comes up regularly across industry associations is duty inversion. And a lot of this duty inversion can be ascribed to earlier free trade agreements, where until and unless that review comes up, your hands are sort of tied. So, it's a question of, I think, calibrating your approach, where keep in mind that free trade agreements allow access to technology, allow access to markets and all of that, but it has to be negotiated well, which I believe the minister and the government are doing very effectively, protecting India's interests. And overall, I think free trade agreements are one arrow in a quiver full of arrows, which work together to ensure that industry is competitive and has access to global markets.
Thank you so much. We've run out of time. what is clear from this discussion is that Indian industry is ready to convert the challenge of Viksit Bharat into a genuine opportunity. Thank you so much.